Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session provided by LitFest Alberta. This specific session this evening is about overcoming the neutral zone trap, hockey's agents of change. My name is Tara McCarthy, and I'm one of the hosts every morning on Edmonton AM on CBC Radio 1, and it's my pleasure to be your panel moderator tonight. We have 4 wonderful guests that are ready to join us. But before I go any further, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that LitFest is produced on Treaty 6 territory, and it's my pleasure to broadcast to you tonight from Amaskwachewa, also known as Edmonton. We respectfully acknowledge that we are grateful to present from this historical meeting place, a home to many Indigenous nations, including the Cree, Nakota Sioux, Papas Chase, Blackfoot, Métis, and others. We extend our hands in respect and friendship to the treaty signatories and all Indigenous nations as we strive to honor the tradition of sharing stories on this very special and sacred land. As I mentioned, we have 4 panelists with us this evening, all involved in this wonderful book produced by the University of Alberta Press. So first, I'd like to introduce Cheryl MacDonald, a sports psychologist at St. Mary's University in Halifax. Her research interests include hockey culture and university athlete support and development. She has twice been a media panelist for the Edmonton Oilers Hockey is for Everyone initiative and was named to the Hockey News list of leading social change advocates. Thanks for joining us this evening, Cheryl.
Thank you for having me.
Jonathon Edwards is an associate professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology at the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton. He has published in a variety of sport management journals, has spoken at a number of conferences, and has conducted research on behalf of national sport organizations. In fact, in 2016, he was the host of the Hockey Conference, which is referenced a number of times in the book. And he has a passion for studying the sport management side of the hockey industry. Pleasure to have you with us this evening, Jonathon.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Kieran Block is a teacher, a former Paralympic sledge hockey, para-hockey player, a graduate of the Western Hockey League, and a former University of Alberta Golden Bear. He also survived a near-fatal cliff diving accident and wrote a book about it, titled The Ups and Downs of Almost Dying, and he's one of the essayists featured in the book that we're talking about this evening. Welcome to you, Kieran.
Thanks for having me.
And last but definitely not least, Angie Abdou has published 7 books and co-edited Writing the Body in Motion, which is a collection of essays on Canadian sport literature. A book list declared her memoir, Home Ice, Reflections of a Reluctant Hockey Mom, a quote, must read for parents with youngsters who play organized sports. Angie Abdou is an associate professor of creative writing at Athabasca University. Thanks for being here this evening, Angie. And Angie is also an essayist included in the book. So let's get going. Now, Cheryl and Jonathon, as you can tell by the cover of the book, you're the editors of this. You helped put this together, wrote the preface that really dives into why you wanted to tackle this. But what I wanted to start with, and Cheryl, maybe you can take it away first, is how you determined and really boiled down what I can imagine the number of voices and who to really include in this whole thing.
It was a little bit serendipitous in the sense that we put a call out for authors at the 2018 Hockey Conference in Edmonton. We just said, if anyone is interested in writing a chapter in a book, please come to this meeting at lunchtime. And between that meeting and a pandemic, we boiled it down to the number of chapters that we had in the book. And so that meant that anyone who wanted to be included was included. We had a couple of people back out, and that was okay. Everyone has different priorities. And so it was very much a voluntary thing. So anyone who wanted to be part of it was part of it. And I think it came together really nicely in terms of the interrelatedness of the chapters, given that it was a little bit random.
It was random, but it wasn't, in the sense that that was the focus of the conference. So we were all there because we wanted to see change in hockey. So we already came with the common purpose that you were looking for in the book.
That's fair.
Did you find though that, so it sounds like it was quite serendipitous, as you said, but you really did want to tackle these different elements in the book, these different sections, make sure that there was a fair representation of all different stories when it comes to hockey. Jonathon, how did you kind of finesse that and arrive at sort of the three main parts that the book is broken into?
Well, there wasn't it wasn't scientific on how we determined that. Actually, to be honest, to be perfectly honest, it actually relates a little bit to what Cheryl and Angie were saying. It's the hockey conference was focused on change, and when we asked for the volunteers for who wanted to publish in the book or who wanted to write something for the book, everybody came forward. A lot of people came forward, and when we started to look at the different areas, there was a lot of discussion. I won't say that there wasn't, but when we started to see who was going to be producing what, and what ended up happening was it was just this natural clumping of topic areas that it was just really, really easy. I shouldn't say it was really easy, but it was pretty darn easy to put all of those together into a package where it really covered three really big areas, and that's ended up with the result that we got.
Angie, maybe you could jump in here and tell, for those in listening this evening that aren't familiar with it, a little bit about the hockey conference, what that is, what that looks like, and what sort of conversations go on there.
Sure. I was laughing when Jonathon said it was easy, because that's the trick. You always, every time you finish a book, you think, wow, that was easy once it's over. And that's what tricks you into writing another one. It was not easy. Let me remind you, I'm sure it wasn't. It's very difficult editing a book like this and bringing together all the different voices and getting everyone to meet their deadlines. And I can imagine Jonathon and Cheryl had many moments where they thought, this is not that easy. But so the hockey conference is academics who specialize in talking about hockey, whether it's from a business end or because they like reading hockey books or art about hockey or social science about hockey or gender studies or whatever approach, to get academics from all over the country with their unique take in hockey. And I'm the one who was there who was not a hockey academic at all. I was trained as a medievalist, first of all, and then as a creative writer, and I teach creative writing at Athabasca University. But I had written this memoir about hockey culture, whereas my idea was to read the academics and to see all these things they're talking about, how to make the game better and how to have change, and see if I can use my memoir to let that information, to direct that information to the parents. So I had written this very accessible hockey memoir, but looking to the experts for advice. So when I went to the conference, it was to meet these people that I'd been reading for a couple of years and writing my books. But yeah, any kind of angle you can think about to take on hockey, there's people like Cheryl and Jonathon who spend their life researching that angle. So everybody gives a 20-minute paper and they're in a session with 3 people. So a session's an hour and a half and there's time for questions, and it's experts from around the country and beyond the country. It's very exciting.
So it really sounds like a book like this was just begging to come out of that conference, right? And to kind of put a lot of that on pages that other people could have access to. Kieran, how did you get involved in this? Because you've written a book yourself, as I mentioned in your bio. How did you get involved with now writing an essay that really took a little look at that book, but then also about what you see as how you can be an agent of change?
Oh, one of the things, yeah, when Cheryl put the call out to us as speakers at the conference to participate in this project, I was excited. I really wanted to share my experience. I think I've had a rare experience in some cases, but also very similar to a lot of other people. And I wanted to just help to be that voice, playing at a high level of hockey, growing up in the stand-up world, and then moving into sledge hockey. I saw some disparities and I saw some problems with what I thought was how it was being run. And I thought that really what I can do as an advocate is just get my voice out there and support. And so when the opportunity came up, I jumped on it. And then just through conversation with Cheryl, we talked about different ideas of what we could include, how we would frame it and reference it. And we put it all together.
Then we stuck them right on the front cover.
I noticed that. I was going to say.
Yeah,
This
I'm
is
very.
Kieran on the cover.
You know what? I'm very humbled by that. Thank you so much, Cheryl, and everyone in the project, John, for selecting me. I really do feel quite privileged to have been selected to be on the cover. It's just it leaves me speechless, really, when it comes down to it, because what a special thing on such a special book.
What was it like too for when this photo was taken? Can you tell us a little bit about the background of this photo?
So that was, we were doing a little mini series in Ottawa against the Americans. And we would just typically throughout the year, we play in tournaments. So we'll just kind of meet up somewhere all over the world, Japan, Korea, sometimes just in the States or in Canada. And we'll play in these tournaments. And so in between tournaments, we look to build on competition. So we'll connect with another country and set up little mini series with that country just to get basically more games, because there's no league. So if you imagine in any given year, you'll go to maybe 4 tournaments in a year, which actually be a lot. You're playing about 20 games compared to, a national league or any pro leagues where you're playing 82 games because you just have an ongoing season. And so in that moment, actually, to be honest, I think I just bought those shoes. So I was really excited about that because they were Team Canada colors. And I believe I just got them at Sport Check. I just came across them. I was like, I have to have these. And then it was just us skating onto the ice. And actually what's special about that picture is it was a time when I had been playing in a position of forward, and we had some injuries, and just in discussions with the coaches and everything, I went back onto defense, and I got to be I ended up skating out as one of the first people, and our photographer was there just snapping pictures, and it was one that just stuck with me. I thought it really encased what it meant to drive out. It was our passion, it was our hard work, our focus, and what it meant to be a sledge hockey player representing Canada. And it's a photo that's stuck with me for a long time.
And now it's published on the cover of a book.
And now it's on the front cover of a book. Yeah.
I did want to take a moment to let all the participants this evening know that if you do have any questions throughout the panel, we'd love to hear them. So you can drop them in the Q&A section on your Zoom screen. And I'll make some space where I can for any questions that do pop up throughout the conversation. Jonathon, I want to go back to you for a second because you were involved in Chapter 1, which really looks at, it digs into U sports. It looks at university hockey and what that looks like. As you work through this and knowing the background you gave at the top of this hockey conference where you had many discussions with academics, did anything surprise you when you started to look a little bit more, whether it was at the numbers or look at some of these surveys and interviews you did with some of these U sports players?
No, well, no, I don't think it did too much. What it did for me though was there was always this myth, right? And there was always there's this perception that you have to go to the CHL or you have to go to the NCAA, and those are the only routes that you're only ever going to get to if you're going to go and play professional hockey. And I always used to look at the U sport as like the forgotten league, or the best. I used to call it the best kept secret. And I said, one time, once I got my dissertation done, and I said, these are one of those goals that you want to do. And I had a grad student, we worked together, and he was a hockey player as well for U Sport, and he worked for Hockey Canada for a little bit. Now I think he works for the Montreal. No, he works for a golf course right now. But we just talked about this whole thing. There are options available from U Sport, and there are players that are going and playing professional. It doesn't always have to be the NHL and the big, but there are options there throughout the world that a lot of these players take that opportunity. And this is a league that can develop you to get to and provide those opportunities for you.
Can I just say on that note, Derek Ryan is one of those guys. Yeah. Plays with the Edmonton Oilers currently. So
yeah.
Thanks for adding that, Kieran. Angie, your essay touches on the book that you wrote, as you've mentioned. And one thing that struck me is because it talks about your relationship with another hockey parent. And you mentioned that the two of you agree that sports should be about family, fitness, and fun. How much do you think those three rather, because my numbers are off, 3 Fs are still a central part of the game on any level?
No, I think it takes a constant reminding, the parents have to constantly remind themselves and each other and the coaches that that's the focus. I don't know what it is about hockey. I'm involved in other sports and it's much easier to remember that the focus is fitness and fun and family. But in hockey, maybe because of, the dreams associated with the NHL and this fame and the glory, something makes the parents a bit crazy and the coaches a bit crazy, and too early. It's about playing the best players and sitting the other players. When they're so young, you don't know who's going to be good. And yet already you're benching 9-year-olds and 7-year-olds. And by the time by the time they're 13, they're leaving. And that is a statistic fact. By the time kids are 13, they're mass exodus out of hockey. So why can't we? And some people might think this is naive, but why can't we keep it fun for those kids and let them play and make it about enjoyment and try to keep them in it as long as you can? So instead of making the goal of let's be good, let's be great, make the goal can we keep them in it through grade 12? Because in my town, we can't. Everybody's obsessed when they're 9, and by the time they're 13, they're done. So, and this is my book that you mentioned. I'll just hold it up.
Home Ice. Home Ice.
And Carl Subban was my friend that you mentioned, and he and I have remained fast friends and done events together. And we're totally at opposite spectrums of the game. I had a very recreational young boy playing hockey that I wrote about. He has 3 sons drafted for the NHL that he writes about, but yet we really connected and we had a great time touring around and talking about hockey.
Well, and that's why I say, at all levels about the idea of family fitness and fun, how that's still remains, how that's disappeared, because you and Carl do come from different levels of the hockey world, but you've found so many parallels, so many similarities in your stories. There was another moment in your essay that I noticed where you talked about youth sport, how it's become big business. And I wonder if that's what's really tapping into that whole idea of it moving away from those 4 central Fs of family, fitness, and fun.
Absolutely. And I think it's also what makes it hard for there to be change and why there's so much resistance to people like Cheryl and Jonathon. I mean, when you try to say, let's make a change, people whose livelihood is tied to it being the way it is right now, they don't want to hear about change, right? People whose livelihood is tied to getting 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds go to very, very expensive hockey camps and move away from their families and become stars when they're not even teenagers yet. They don't want to see change. They're making good living off the way that it is. Am I going too far, Cheryl? No. Okay. Kieran says no too. Okay, you guys know more than I'm just the mom. See, I always have to downplay myself because I'm not a hockey expert, but I have very strong feelings. And when I say them, I have to check them in with the experts. But I think I'm being fair. And I'm very much involved in swimming as my sport. And it's just not the same. There's something different about hockey in this country that makes it so hard to have sensible conversations and so hard to offer critique and so hard to ask for change. It's a very different feeling.
Well, and I have to point out, Angie, that in your essay, you talk about having to become quieter, right? You talk about that. So we want to hear your voice in this panel. Yeah. Everything you say matters. You are a hockey mom because you talk about that a lot in your essay. And this idea that there are certain people, especially that ingrained the upper management, the coaches, that kind of feel like they're the gatekeepers of the sport when there are a lot of different people that are involved in this sport. And I'd love anyone to comment on their takes on what that looks like.
So I was just going to weigh in because a lot of my work is about the professionalization of youth sports and how that comes to be and how that looks. And I particularly, my whole dissertation a number of years ago was on the professionalization of hockey and youth sports and hockey. And I couldn't agree with you more, Angie, on that side of things. Hockey is a business now, and that's essentially what it comes down to is dollars and cents and what money and what can be driven. Like if you go back prior in the 80s and things like that, it was, you didn't play hockey 12 months of the year. And at some point along the line that all switched and it got into parents' head that, I gotta, the season's over in March, but you know what, if we do these extra little bits, they're going to get ahead for September. And what it does is it just compounds on itself, right? Because that parent thinks that, and then the next parent beside them is going, well, if they're doing that only till like July, well, we got to go to August. And then all of a sudden it turned into 12 months of the year, all the time, constantly playing hockey. And no wonder we have things like burnout, and we have people struggling, and all these issues that come to the forefront, when it is because it's becoming a competition of who can get above everybody else, and almost a competitive advantage.
Well, and don't forget,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kieran.
sorry, I was going to say, and don't forget the hockey academies now in the schools. Being a teacher, I've seen it. I worked in it. Now it's like we have hockey programs for elementary age kids, and so that means they're, I think grade 3 or 4 was the earliest or the youngest, but still, so that 8, 9 years old, 10 years old, kids are now going to school all year playing in the hockey on top of spring hockey, summer hockey, the regular season. It's more than 12 months, I think now. I think it's like we're fitting in 14, 15 months in that 12 months.
And you talked about burnout, Jonathan, but also everybody here knows about repetitive injuries or imbalances and things that kids are so much better served by doing multi-sport. And in the long run, it will be better for their hockey too, is the irony. But that message is not going to be getting out through hockey if it's wanting to promote its all year round hockey academies, and it's very expensive summer camps. And but there's organizations like Sport for Life and Active for Life that really are trying to push that multi-sport balance attitude, and how to keep people in sport for life, instead of focusing on having really great 9-year-old hockey players in this country and really great 11-year-old hockey players. What about if we try to have that bulk of kids still playing in grade 12? Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah, and Kieran, I wondered if we could go back to you for a moment and talk a little bit about how you maybe saw some of these similarities in sledge hockey as well. Because I know there was one little isolation I made from your essay where you wrote, I felt the need to take the opportunity to make this issue of defining disabilities visible because it is more common than many would guess. You were met with a lot of issues as you did shift and change in your sport. And I wondered if you could talk about a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, to be completely frank, when I first shattered my legs, if I would have went into sledge hockey, I would have classified no problem. I decided in my recovery process, I was going to get myself mentally and physically healthy, which made me ineligible, which is ridiculous in itself. At one point, when I went to classify in my first year, I met with doctors all over the world. And every tournament I would go to, they would say, "Oh, you're too disabled for stand-up hockey. We acknowledge that, but you're not disabled enough for sledge hockey." Now I'm going to show you. I had about 10 degrees of movement in my ankle, so like I could move my ankle about this much. Now in that, I had a lot of arthritis, and that caused me a lot of pain. I wasn't able to even just my day-to-day. I couldn't walk without exhibiting a lot of pain. And so that limited what I could do. I was ineligible at that point for sledge hockey. Fast forward a couple of years, I missed some competition. And my ankle is naturally fusing itself in the process. I ultimately did get the medical procedure to get it fused. Coming out of that, I recovered quite nicely. My doctor said, you can do whatever you want now, to the point where I couldn't move my ankle that 10 degrees. But it no longer hurt me the same way. I could basically run on it. Granted, it's an awkward run. And now I'm classifiable for sledge hockey. So after I finished my career, I went back into stand-up hockey because it was so good. And I played at the senior level with Ryan Smith. So I'm good enough to play hockey with Captain Canada, and I can classify as disabled, but when I can't even stand on my own 2 feet, I'm not disabled enough to play the sport. And that's my experience, but there's others along the way. Like one gentleman I played with could not classify because he took medication that if he stopped taking, he could lose his life. So for him to risk classification, he would have to risk dying. So he would take his medication, which made him too healthy, but he couldn't play the stand-up game. And that's just one case of many. Sledge hockey, wheelchair basketball, all these different sports have different definitions of what a disability is. And I understand that they need to protect what it is to be disabled. I fully support that, because if you had able-bodied competitors, you would eliminate a lot of the people that are paraplegics and so on. However, there needs to be a more of a holistic, like a gray area approach of what a disability is, because it's not black and white. And we have people sitting in a boardroom going, okay, this is what the disability is. And that rules out a lot of people that don't fit into the box, which in the disabled world, no one fits in the box.
Yeah, and it strikes me about another quote from your essay that we'll get to in a bit, but I want to move over to Cheryl for a moment, because I think this is now going into a realm of identity and how people find that sense of belonging, that sense of identity with hockey as their career shifts and changes, or what that looks like. And Cheryl, toward the end of the book, you interview Brock McGillis. And I wondered if you could touch on a little bit about what you two speak about in that interview, but also what really struck you from your conversation with Brock, and under that kind of idea of identity and fitting into this world of hockey and what it supposedly is or isn't.
Sure. Brock is someone that I have spent hours and hours and hours on the phone with. I think for almost 3 years, we would spend up to 3 hours a week on the phone talking about exactly this. And eventually, when my research went into a direction where I started interviewing openly gay players, I said, well, then we might as well sit down for like a proper structured interview to get your thoughts out, like officially and throughout my work. And it's a lot of the same things, right? So what I think the theme so far for all of us in this panel is fitting into boxes, right? Hockey in Canada, especially, and as the levels increase in competition, the person that you can be, that definition gets narrower and narrower and narrower as you get to the top, whether that's in para hockey or stand-up hockey, whether that is in women's hockey or men's hockey. And we spend, well, I say we, I try to remove myself from the collective we these days, but there is so much time spent policing other people's identities, and it is often described in terms of what you cannot be in order to be present. And so that has always been what underpinned my discussions with Brock, right? You can't be gay, or if you are, you can't be effeminate. You can't be gay, but if you are, you have to be really good at hockey. You know, and those complexities are mirrored in what Kieran said. You can't be disabled, but like there are little boxes where we can put you if you are, but even just defining disability is hard. And that came out more broadly. And so the chapter with Brock is a very small part of a broader research project that I did, where it became clear that, yeah, anti-gay language and attitudes are certainly used to put people down and to make them feel inferior. But the reality is, it doesn't matter if you're gay. It doesn't matter if you have a chronic injury. It doesn't matter if you suffer from any type of addiction or substance abuse issues. It doesn't matter if you've been sexually abused. It doesn't matter if you're a person of color. If there is anything going on with you that makes you not straight, white, and really good at hockey and able to shut up, there's somebody behind you with the same skill set that's coming for your job, whether you're 9 or 30. And so my chapter with Brock is very important, but what I've learned is that it's not just about that. And I think it's that small box that needs to change in very big ways. And I, especially like when I was listening to Angie talk about being a hockey parent, I was thinking the chapter right after Angie's is exactly about what happens when you don't fit in that box. And so we have an example in that chapter of somebody who had the audacity, in quotation marks, I say that sarcastically, had the audacity to point out that if there were a group of Indigenous kids on the Humboldt Broncos bus, probably would have had a very different conversation, and she was crucified for having said that. And I will grant that maybe it wasn't the right time to say what she said, but the point is that box is very small that we try to fit people in, and that was my goal with Brock's chapter.
I want to go to Angie because I wrote down this quote from your essay. Unfortunately, for the most part, those who have power to affect change are also those standing in its way. And I feel like that fits in quite well with what Cheryl was just sharing. Did you want to elaborate a bit more on that sentence in
Yeah,
your essay?
I can just in a small town way, but I think where I am is a microcosm of the bigger issue in Hockey Canada. I mean, my changes I was suggesting were not very big. I was like, well, what if, we have very few kids in the town, but they always divide them into an A and a B team. And people who do the selection process have told me if you rate the kids, they're actually from a 5 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10. So I was like, why don't you combine the kids, make 2 equal teams? They can have games at home that don't involve the cost and the highway danger of traveling and the time and all of that. And we could have a smaller league at home instead of our kids were driving 9 years old. They would drive 3 hours to Golden for a league game. They'd cross the border into Whitefish, Montana for a game. So my suggestions were just small, like divide the kids equally, have 2 equal teams, don't bench the kids. They're young. Why don't you let them all play equally? Don't hit the kids over the head with your stick. It's not very good for brain injuries. Like really not, but people were so angry. They were just so angry at this book. And it was just kind of like, who are you to say this? What do you know? You're referring to research for people who have no respect for the research you're referring to. And that's the people running the show here and running the practices and deciding who makes the teams. And so I just thought, I can't, there's no way to have a conversation about things being different. And on the other hand, the optimism, because I want to be optimistic. I did have, Jeff Turner from Hockey Canada reached out to me after hearing my interview on CBC, and he said, change is hard. And change in hockey is especially hard. People have the dreams of their kids being the next great one, and so they don't want to they don't want to try half ice hockey because the people who made it did it on full ice hockey. Little change they're resistant to. And so he said, change is hard. Change is especially hard in hockey because you have all these big dreams attached to it. He said, but the time that you can make changes during crisis, and Hockey Canada is in crisis. And now, 2 years later, 3 years later, Hockey Canada is really in crisis. So if there is going to be a change, it's now when things are in crisis. And there are people like Jeff Turner who knows there needs to be changes on the board at Hockey Canada. There's people like Carl Subban deep in the NHL world who knows the importance of fun fitness. And we have people like Cheryl and Jonathon and Kieran doing the research of saying, here's the change that needs to be done. So maybe it's the time for this research to move out into the mainstream and be like, okay, you want change? We've thought this through. We're ready. We're ready. I like to believe. Of course, there's all kinds of very smart people associated with Hockey Canada, and they're not evil. It's just the combination of the dream of hockey glory and then the big business part that Jonathon has talked to, and then a long history of toxicity around sex and gender that is a whole other issue. These are big, hard changes. But if there's a time, it's when it's in crisis and we have good people at the job, I think. I'm still holding on to some optimism.
Yeah, of course, Hockey Canada was going to come up in this conversation. It does. It goes beyond the book because it's happening right now, but it's definitely a part of the book. And Jonathon, as I mentioned earlier when I introduced you, you have this passion for looking at sports management in the hockey industry. And when you do look at the changes that have been made, and some of them that you talk about in the book, do you see these incremental changes, like Angie said, only really happening when we meet these crises? And what does that say about the industry, do you think?
So the premise of the book was on talking about change, and to answer your question, I have to kind of go back a little bit and talk a little bit about what Cheryl and Angie and Kieran have all said about the kind of putting it into boxes. And when you get into these boxes, they become norms in that environment, and they're defined as these institutional norms. So to break an institutional norm is incredibly hard. And that's the challenge that this management group is facing. I think to break some of these norms, I always said that hockey in itself operated in a closed system. So everything else that went outside around the boundaries of hockey they just kind of ignored it, or they put these boundaries up that wouldn't affect the inside. And it wasn't until there is a crisis situation that all of a sudden, that's when they realize, oh boy, I got it, we have to change this. And it takes sometimes those big events or those big situations for people to actually realize that there are things that are going wrong, or there are things that aren't right in the environment that they're in. Incremental changes, I don't want to take anything away from them, because sometimes that is actually one of the best ways to make big change. Start small and continue to work through it. So there's nothing wrong with that, but from a perspective that I look at Hockey Canada, I look at hockey overall, it created these broader institutional boundaries that kind of hit everything, and then all of a sudden it came to light, and it's like, oh no, we got to change. And it kind of brings that out. And then all of a sudden everybody's scrambling and trying to go, like, we got to do this now, right? Because all of a sudden, if you look at the situation for Hockey Canada, all of a sudden money started leaving, and sponsors started leaving. And I mean, I sit in a delivery systems class, and I always, for 10 years now, I've started off and I said, what would hockey look like if Tim Hortons and Timbits went away, so we didn't have Timbits hockey anymore? Well, we're about to find out, right? They just suspended it, right? We don't have Timbits hockey anymore. So those are the kinds of things that sometimes need to happen for change to occur.
Kieran, I said I wanted to come back to a quote out of your essay, because it was right toward the end, and it really struck me, because I think you meant more than just what this sentence says. You write, on August 6, 2007, I shattered my leg, and along with it, my identity.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a hockey player, and so everything I did was hockey focused. You know what? I would run to the gym, go work out, run home as part of just my regimen for training, for working out, just working towards hockey. All of a sudden, all that was gone. My friend group was gone. I felt very isolated and alone during this time. And I started to sort of connect with different people in my network that weren't in my direct social network, because it's who you are, and it encompasses so much of your time when you play hockey, because you're, day and night, you're thinking about hockey, you're thinking about that next practice, that next game, the next tournament, whatever, and you have that goal in mind of winning your league, and being a champion of some sort. And without that, it was like, who am I? And I never had to face that. I never had to think about it in my life, because I was always a hockey player. And I think I probably started it when I was little. I used to play hockey sort of year round. Granted, it was a lot for fun. I would play just like a pickup hockey, where there was really no meaning to it, because I enjoyed it. So I didn't have a lot of those other experiences. I didn't have a lot of other passions. And upon breaking my legs, I lost that piece of who I was, because I couldn't play hockey. And so what did that mean for me? Like, how are people going to see me there? And I did have some pretty negative thoughts that people would just see me as this disabled person, this cripple. And I would use harsh language a lot of times with myself, because that was sort of my experience looking at it through the lens from the other side of, when I saw somebody that, was in a wheelchair or whatever, I had not an empathetic view, but a sympathetic view of, oh, like, that sucks to be them. And then out of sight, out of mind, not realizing, like, well, that's a person, they have an identity. And so when I shattered my legs, along with it, my identity, and it took a lot for me to rebuild myself. But probably one of the things that ultimately really saved my life and helped me for the long run, because it gave me a new perspective on what life meant after hockey. Because even though I was playing U sports, and at the time CIS, I was still a hockey player. And so there's still that goal of, okay, well, after this, I can go and play pro. I can go and play hockey. I'm going to keep playing hockey. And it was sort of like hockey. After that, it was like, okay, well, what am I going to do now? And I didn't really know what a lot of other passions were in my life because I had spent so much time and energy playing hockey.
Thanks for sharing that, Kieran. Angie, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your identity as a hockey mom and what that looked like after hearing, what Kieran shared there, and what led you to really write that book.
Yeah, so I was a reluctant hockey mom. I wasn't an all-in like in the title. So when my son was interested in hockey, I signed him up for skating lessons, which were run by the figure skating club. And I told him it was hockey. And so he was just little and he'd wear his hockey helmet and his hockey skates and he'd skate around like a maniac, charging into everything. And then the second year he said, "Can I play hockey?" I'm like, "Oh, I just signed you up. We're going today." He's like, "Mom, like real hockey." He didn't want to do the figure skating anymore. So I was slow to sign him up. And my husband, we live in a ski town where there's lots of outdoor opportunities. We can ski every weekend. The ski hill's 10 minutes from our house. There's mountain biking trails, cross country ski trails. There's all these things. And my husband was like, "I don't want to go run around to hockey rinks all over Alberta and BC and Montana. Like, we live here for a reason. I want to enjoy the life we picked." So he said, "No, I'm not doing it." But I love sports. I really do. And I really believe in following kids' passions. So I will do this for you, for my son. And so I did it. I drove him all over the place and I went to every hockey practice and it was fun. There was lots of fun parts to it. But I always felt kind of on the outside. Like I was never pushing for it. I was never totally bought into the culture. I never had the NHL dream or anything, WHL dream or the varsity dream, none of the dreams. So my dream was that he would stop playing hockey and join the swim club one day. So it's a whole other story. But so I was kind of in but out, which is the perfect place to write any book from. I mean, doesn't feel that way to the people who are being written about. It feels like not the perfect place, but for me, I was in enough to see it up close and personal, but I hadn't bought into it. So I was constantly questioning it. And what I was questioning was, this doesn't feel as fun as it should. Like, why are the kids always crying? And why are they, some kids are not getting to play at all, and other kids are getting to play all the time, but they are getting pressured. And, why are we driving on winter roads and we could die like that on these roads? And we're doing this for 9-year-olds to play hockey. Like, I was constantly questioning. And so I guess I didn't fully put on my hockey mom suit. I was there as an imposter, questioning the whole thing the whole time. But I, as someone who loved sports, like I loved sports, so I was surprised to find myself thinking there's something's not all well in the kingdom of hockey. Was my feeling the whole time. And I mean, as someone who grew up in Moose Jaw during the Graham James era, that should not have come as a surprise to me that something is not all right in the hockey era. It's never been all right. As Cheryl said, I saw Cheryl tweet and she said, when that whole thing blew up recently, and she just said something along the lines of, "I'm not answering questions about this anymore. This isn't new." Like, and she sounded so mad and so despairing and so just like throwing her hands up in there. And I thought, it's not new. It was happening in the 80s in Moose Jaw, and it's been happening ever. It's a long time this has been happening.
Cheryl, where does your passion for the sport, looking at the sport from all angles, the negatives and the positives, where does that come from for you?
So do you mean my anger?
Yeah, where does your anger come from, Cheryl, other than just deep down inside?
Are you essentially asking why I'm doing this? Is that what you're getting at? It's a whole other panel, Tara.
I know it's a whole other panel, but essentially that is what I'm asking. Yeah.
I originally got into this sport to fit in. That is like the easiest way to sum up several hours of explanation. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to feel wanted and included and loved by various people in my life, anywhere from my family to random boys at school, to be honest. And in a lot of ways, that is where I found the most acceptance, was in that community. Even though things didn't always quite feel right. Things didn't always quite feel right for me in every aspect of my life. And it turned out that was because I had undiagnosed ADHD probably. But I was like Angie. I participated in hockey on the ice very briefly, but I participated in the community with my family, with my romantic partners, with my friends. And there's always that small voice once in a while that is like, something's not right here. Either those little overt moments where you see somebody being mistreated and you don't quite have the nerve to speak up, or you do speak up and then suddenly you're on the outside with whoever they had just excluded. And for reasons that I can't quite figure out in this very moment, there's something about this sport still that I love. I compare it to the sausage principle a little bit now, or the hot dog analogy, where sometimes I have to tell myself, if you really love something, don't ask how it's made. And then I have to remind myself that not everybody's a hot dog. That was about the most
Was that the
intellectual.
working title for the book originally?
Not everybody's a hot dog.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
actually my next book.
Oh, okay, good. Coming soon.
And so being able to remember that there are moments where I am so deeply in love with this sport and so deeply in love with some of the people who also love it. And in a lot of ways, it did provide me with so much opportunity and so much happiness. And it became a matter of figuring out who I am without hockey, right? This is another common theme, like when you are so ingrained in it, because for me, like, no, I was my father called me a 10-cent goalie. And so that's not my claim to fame, but professionally it was like my whole identity was, I am a hockey scholar, and like, there's nothing really else about me per se. And so it was having to step away from that in my case, because of my mental health, just, I didn't have to shatter my legs, but my brain and my heart were pretty shattered, not to take away from Kieran's experience in any way, but and figure out who I was without it, and then find ways to interact with it that were meaningful for me. And so then it became, that quotation, go where you're celebrated, not tolerated. And I'm still figuring out how to do that. But it's becoming easier. And now that I am choosing to go where I'm celebrated, I'm able to fall in love with the game all over again. And I'm able to find like-minded people who have the same goals as me, or even better, we don't always agree, but we challenge one another and try to find a way to do things better for everybody. And I mean, those moments are few and far between, but by and large, they're the only reasons that I'm still here and doing this and finding purpose in it.
Well, and that's what I get out of this book, is that this is to have the conversations that need to be had, essentially, and to put them in this one place that, like I said earlier, is accessible to everyone. Because a lot of these existed in the hockey conference. I haven't been to the hockey conference. So many people haven't been to the hockey conference. So Jonathon, what does it mean to have this collection that's diverse, that takes us into all different corners of the sport? What does it mean to have that out there? And who do you hope really picks this up and takes a good look at it?
I think that's an excellent question, and it's one that Cheryl and I had when we were looking at how to develop the book, right? Like, both of us come from academic backgrounds, so the natural action would be for us to create an academic book that academics and grad students and undergrad students would read. And actually Cheryl and I look at, I think we approach academia a little bit differently, and we look at it a lot of practical, and we see that what research can do to help create change and help influence decisions. And so for us, when we started to look at how this book was going to be developed and created, we didn't want it just to be a bunch of academic research that was going to be. We wanted to hear Kieran's story. We wanted to hear Angie's story. We wanted to hear different ways to present the stories, so that we got away from that whole, you have to be an academic to look at that book. We wanted it to be something that becomes accessible to anybody who reads it, and someone who has a passion or an interest in hockey. And I think for us, that was what we wanted. We wanted to broaden the scope. We wanted to hear the stories. We wanted to make sure those were all included, because those were important. And it's just not about research. And I think that's that's what we work for. And to be honest, I guess to go back to your question, who do we want to read it? We want everybody to read it, like anybody, right? I mean, even if I'm executive at Hockey Canada, if there's any left, they could have a good read of that and see that, as Cheryl said, this isn't something new. It's like some of this stuff is not new, but there are positives and optimism for the future. So let's capitalize on that.
Kieran, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to outline, like I what a lot of you are saying really resonates with me in finding what I love about hockey, because I do love the sport. And when I was sort of picking myself back up, it was sledge hockey, that community that brought me in and sort of gave me a new view, a new look on what it meant just to be a part of a group. And I often will refer to my first sledge hockey experience as a support group. I go into the dressing room, I'm looking around, there's wheelchairs, there's prosthetic legs and so on. And everyone, it really is, up until I'll say fairly recently, sledge hockey, what was different about it initially was that it was a lot about participation. And when you're on the world stage, like sometimes you don't want it to be about participation. You want to compete to be the best, like just that inner athlete in me for sure. But at the local levels, like there's community members that I still connect with as support groups. Just recently, I reached out to a friend of mine to put her in contact with another friend of mine because of the experiences that they've both had, knowing that my friend B needed support from friend A that I couldn't provide. And it helped just build that community around me to know that there's other people that have been through similar experiences. But even further, one of my favorite things I play recreational hockey just as a shinny, just as an activity, just to get exercise. We don't actually put sticks in the middle anymore, but basically we're putting sticks in the middle and we just pick up and we just play. We play for an hour and a half. We get good exercise. We hang out with each other. We support each other. And now, I've been fortunate. I've been able to play hockey with my dad, who's 75 for the last 35 years. Basically, as soon as I could skate, I've been able to be on the ice with him playing hockey, and it's just that to me is more of what hockey is and should be about. And even with my friends, like they'll come out and play, and it's like I don't care who wins, who scores, who I get to hang out with my friends and just celebrate some time together while we're getting exercise. So that fun, that exercise that you were talking about earlier, and that's to me what I love about hockey is just we get lost in the politics and the business when at the root of it, hockey's a fantastic game and it's a great way to get exercise. And again, I could go on and on about like one of the individuals had a situation arise, and we came together as our random pickup hockey group to support this individual so that he could continue to play the game that he loves and be a part of our group. And we just did it just to help out our fellow human person, neighbor, whatever you want to say. So that to me is what hockey is. That's what I like about it, is the camaraderie of just being with my friends, my family, and getting to spend time together.
I think it's so important what you say to make the distinction between hockey, the game, and hockey, the culture, because my son loved playing hockey and he wasn't especially talented and he wasn't going to play forever, but boy, he loved it. And he's so happy going and so happy coming home. And I see that in my brother who's in his 50s. And I think the game is so fun, but the culture needs some fixing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I know even just with all the headlines of late, being less involved in the hockey industry as all of you are, and with a lot of the research you've done, with a lot of the writing you've done, I know for myself, I know that I don't hate the game, but the culture disturbs me. The culture makes me upset, just as a journalist, right? I really thank you for all of your time. It's been fantastic to take a look at this book beyond the pages. I really encourage anyone that's been participating tonight, if you haven't yet picked up the book, I really hope that we were able to kind of fill in the gaps about a lot of what is talked about in the book without giving too much of it away if you haven't read it. And if you have, I hope it gave you that perspective that just jumps a little bit off the page with all these great panelists. So I know there's not really a round of applause that can be given other than my dog and I, but she's not much of a clapper. But thank you to all four of you for being such a great panel to hang out with for this last hour. Thank you for the book. And I also want to thank the festival staff, Brianne, Elka, Carly, as well as LitFest volunteers. Special thanks to our online event producer, Trent Crosby, for making everything go smoothly. Thanks to Jenna O'Connor for having us all here this evening. All of the LitFest titles that you may have already seen events about, or tonight's event, they're all available at a number of wonderful booksellers. So go to Glass Bookshop. They're also on their website, glassbookshop.com. And we will have one more online event during the festival. It's on Sunday, October 23rd. It's at noon. It'll be moderated by the fabulous Sheila Rogers of CBC's The Next Chapter. And it'll feature panelists Tracy Lindbergh, Tom Roberts, and Michelle Good. They'll all be in conversation talking about Harold R. Johnson's book, The Power of Story. It's going to be an excellent conversation. We really hope you'll join us. If you haven't registered for it yet, you can go to litfestalberta.org, and there you'll find all the other events that are happening all the way till Sunday for LitFest this year. If you want to support any of the programming, donations are welcomed as well by going online. Once again, it's litfestalberta.org. It's been such a pleasure to hang out with you tonight, panel. Thanks for all of your time and all of your great words. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tara.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tara.
Buddy.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a great
Bye.
evening.